My first float was in late summer of 2015, and I've been here every other week, just as if the doctor wrote a prescription. I had been doing a form of body work that was good psychologically and for pain management, and that became no longer available to me. And a friend suggested that I try floating. So I came out and I signed up for the 3 float introductory package, and am really glad I did. They're 90-minute floats. And the first one, like so many people, I sort of had a little trouble settling in my first time. One of the values of doing the 3 sessions is that you find out that every float is likely to be different. And that was certainly my experience with the 3 floats. Over time, since then, I have found that the every other week is the best timing for me. That's what I get the most benefit out of. This is true in terms of pain management, which actually it was a surprise to me early on how much different the pain level was. I sort of realized at some point that on an ongoing basis, I didn't have as much pain as I was accustomed to having 24/7. Psychologically, I have found that because it allows for that really deep meditative state, it's very good, again, long term, because everything is cumulative. Long term, it has had really good psychological benefits. It also has had cognitive benefits. My ability to focus when I'm working on a project or at work, and my ongoing ability to focus has improved considerably. In terms of how often a person should float, that's really an individual thing. And there are people who float every day. There are people who float a couple, 3 times a week. For me, like I said, every other week is what is best for me, gives me the most benefit. And another thing to experiment with is the time of day and the day of the week. I started out floating on Thursday afternoons when I got off work, and I got off work at 3:00, and I'd come out and float at 5. And I didn't work on Friday, so I thought that was an ideal time to float. Well, it turns out it was not. It turns out that actually the Friday, when I'm not scheduled to work, and in the middle of the day, is the time of day and the day of the week that I get the most benefit out of. And I think a person just needs to experiment with that until they find what is optimal for them. When I'm in the tank, there are times that I just zone out very quickly. I tend to have the heat off, and I turn the light off in the tank. Because I like that absolute lack of sound, lack of sensation of any kind. And again, every float is a little bit different. I had one float when my mind was just absolutely bouncing off the walls and the ceiling, and it wouldn't slow down. And I found myself saying, stop, 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 you've got to quit thinking. And then I kind of laughed, and I thought, no, I don't. I'm in the tank. And if what my mind needs to do is chase its tail, let it go, because that's obviously what I need during this float. And the next thing I knew, I had zoned out somewhere and had a thoroughly restful and meditative float. There again, it's getting out of the way and letting the float do what it is that you actually need instead of what you're trying to turn it into. There's a big thing with me. I did a lot of singing, and one of the things I had to learn there was how to get out of my own way, and let the voice just be its own thing. And I think floating has some of the same elements to it. Not trying to accomplish anything, not having any real expectations. I have a note on my computer at home that says my expectations are fluid. And I think that applies to the tank, because I have learned to not have any set goals, not any set expectations. Just get into the tank and see what happens. Another thing that I think is important to be aware of is that floating is cumulative. It's a process, and it's like many other things. It's like yoga or Tai Chi or singing or dancing, any of the arts. It isn't like a game where you go in and you learn the rules and then you play. It's something that is a process, and as a process, the effects are cumulative. We used to say, singing, that if you missed a day of practice, it took 2 days to get back to where you were before you missed a day. And I would not apply that as a set rule to floating, but it is still true that it is cumulative, and the benefits, having been doing this now for going on, well, it'll be 3 years, late summer, I find that the longer I float and the more regularly I float, that every other week, the cumulative benefits just keep growing. I had a time this winter when I was sick, and I had 6 weeks between floats because I wasn't going to come out here when I was contagious. And I did notice, first float was great, as they usually are, but I did notice that it took me then about 2 or 3 floats to really get back to where I was before I got sick and had that 6-week gap, which was, again, a reminder that this is cumulative, and it's a process, and you just want to keep going.
What would you say to someone thinking about floating for the first time, but maybe is a little afraid to try it?
I would say relax, which of course we can't make ourselves relax, but you have complete control in the tank. You can leave the tank door open. You can have the light on. At any point that you're in the tank, you can get out. That reminder that you are in complete control while you're in the tank. You don't need to worry about anything. And there are moments when I'm anxious about something that I find that being in the tank actually does a lot to relieve that anxiety. But I would tell somebody who's concerned about it to try to just go with it. Let it be. And again, know that you are in complete control. You can get out of the tank. I did have one really negative experience in one of my floats, and I don't know where I was out there in La La Land, but I came out of it and I was in a borderline panic attack, because all at once I thought that everybody was gone. The doors were locked. I'd been forgotten. And here I was in the tank, and it was borderline panic attack. I knew enough to know that was not logical. And I managed to kind of talk myself down, because everything in me wanted to jump out of the tank and run. But I knew on an intellectual level that if I could stay in the tank, it would be worth it long term. That if I got out of the tank at that point, the next time I got in the tank, I'd be getting into it with some negative anticipation. So I knew that I really needed to find a way to stay in the tank. And I talked myself down enough by dealing with that intellectual and academic level that it was not logical that everybody was gone. Eventually the music would come on, and it would be to my long-term benefit to ride this out. And I did. And the fascinating thing about that was that even though when the music came on and I got out of the tank, there was still some anxiety there internally, what I really noticed is that the next day and the day after and the day after that, the the impact of that float was every bit as positive as if the float itself had been good. And I find that really fascinating, that no matter what else was going on with me, the long-term impact of that float was a positive one. And that, again, that's one of those personal experiences that I find fascinating about floating. It doesn't matter whether it's a good float or what is going on in the tank. It still will have. And that is, speaking of the day after and the day after, that is something that I think people should be aware of. Again, it's part of that process. It's cumulative, and it isn't just how you feel when you come out of the tank. It's how you feel days later.
And how would you say the experience has changed from when you first started 3 years ago? Or has it?
It hasn't, from the standpoint that every float is different.
Yeah.
It's that, I'm not sure that I can answer that one, because nothing is constant for me with this. I just become more aware all the time of the benefit I'm getting out of it, and more aware of the cumulative benefits. So from that standpoint, but the floats themselves, every float's different.
And that's what we tell people.
I strongly urge people to do a 3-float 90-minute series, because that at least gives them a clue that floats will be different, that they'll have a different experience.
They've been doing 4 years. It'll be 4 years.
Will it be 4 years? Oh, it will. It'll be 4 years. Yeah. See, I can't count. So much for my cognitive improvement.